Today, I'm going to be talking about drawing the graph of a pattern. This is from Unit 1, Lesson 6 in our textbook. Let's get into it. Patterns can be represented in multiple ways to help us understand their structure and growth. One effective method is to visualize the pattern using figures made of squares or tiles. For example, consider a pattern where Figure 1 has 3 tiles, Figure 2 has 5 tiles, Figure 3 has 7, Figure 4 includes 9, and Figure 5 has 11 tiles. In this pattern, we can see that each figure increases by 2 tiles as we move to the next figure number. Another way to represent this same pattern is to simply state the relationship between the figure number and the number of tiles. We can also use tables to organize our pattern data. A table provides a clear, organized way to represent the data. So if we were to create a table to represent the data we just looked at, we would create 3 columns. The first one could be labeled figure number. The second would be the number of tiles. And the third would be the ordered pair. We know that the figures start at 1 and increase by 1 each time up to the number 5. The number of tiles starts at 3 and increases by 2 each time up to the number 11. The ordered pair for each set of numbers would be 1 and 3, 2 and 5, 3 and 7, 4 and 9, and 5 and 11. In this table, the ordered pairs represent the relationship between the figure number and the number of tiles. The figure number is the first coordinate, the x value, and the number of tiles is the second coordinate, the y value. These ordered pairs correspond to the points we will plot on our graph. Now, to draw and label a coordinate graph, we need to make sure that we do certain things. We must label the x-axis. In this case, we will label it figure number. We also must label the y-axis. In this example, we will label it as number of tiles. And the third thing we have to make sure is that we give the graph a title. We will call this one number of tiles in a pattern. When grabbing the ordered pairs, remember that the first number corresponds to the x-axis, which is horizontal, and the second number corresponds to the y-axis, which is vertical. We plot the following points: 1 and 3, 2 and 5, 3 and 7, 4 and 9, and 5 and 11. Looking at the graph, we can observe that each time the figure number increases by 1, the number of tiles increases by 2. For example, when we move from point 37 to point 49, we move 1 unit to the right and 2 units up. Let's look at another example using an input-output table. In this table, the input starts at 1 and increases by 1 each time up to the number 4. The output starts at 5 and increases by 3 each time up to the number 14. To graph this data, we have to remember to label the x-axis. In this example, we can label it as input. We label the y-axis as output. And we need to plot the points. The ordered pairs will be 1 and 5, 2 and 8, 3 and 11, and 4 and 14. From the graph, we can see that as the input increases by 1, the output increases by 3. Now let's analyze another input-output table. We have the input column showing that the input starts at 1 and increases by 1 each time up to the number 5. The output column starts at the number 11 and increases by 2 each time up to the number 19. To graph this data, we have to create a title for the graph. Label the x-axis as input, label the y-axis as output, and we plot the points 1 and 11, 2 and 13, 3 and 15, 4 and 17, and 5 and 19. We also need to write the coordinate pairs beside each plotted point for clarity. Now, remember to note that the x-axis starts at 1 and increases by 1 each time, while the y-axis should have appropriate scaling, starting low enough to include 11 and increasing by appropriate intervals such as 2. In this case, we start with the number 1 for the y-axis and increase by 2 for each line. Looking at this pattern, we can identify several pattern rules. We can look at the pattern rule for the input, showing that it starts at 1 and increases by 1 each time. The pattern rule for the output, where it starts at 11 and increases by 2 each time. And of course, the pattern rule that relates the relationship of the input to the output. And that, in this case, would be if we multiply the input by 2 and then add 9, we get the output. We can write this relationship as an expression. If we let the letter n represent the input, then our expression could be 2n plus 9 equals our output. There are times that you will come across a problem where you start with a graph and you need to create an input-output table. So in this case, remember, the x-axis is labeled input number and the y-axis is labeled output number. Our plotted points in this case are 1 and 9, 2 and 16, 3 and 23, and 4 and 30. From the information on the graph, I know that my input-output table will have 2 columns. The first one, titled Input, will start with the number 1 and increase by 1 each time up to the number 4. The second column, labeled Output, will start at the number 9 and increase by 7 each time. Each of these ordered pairs represents a point on our graph and helps us see the relationship between inputs and outputs. That's all for now. Till next time.